3 days after they buried her husband, they came for his ranch. Eleanor Hayes stood at the door of the courthouse with Daniel's ledger pressed to her chest and listened to the judge tell her in front of the whole town that a widow without a male heir had 30 days to either sell or remarry. 30 days. She had spent 17 years building everything in that ledger beside her husband. And then a name was called from the back of the room that nobody expected. Thomas Reed. The man they called the Ghost of Blackwater Ridge. The loneliest cowboy in Montana Territory. And nobody, not even Eleanor, knew why he said yes. Subscribe now and tell me your city in the comments. Let's see how far this story goes. The funeral was on a Thursday. By Sunday, they were already meeting without her. Eleanor Hayes found out from May Calloway, who ran the dry goods store on the main street, and who told Eleanor everything she knew in the direct apologetic way of a woman who believed information was kindness, even when it wasn't comfortable. May came to the ranch on Sunday afternoon while Eleanor was still wearing black and told her that the town council had been in session at the judge's office since Friday morning. "About what?" Eleanor said. May looked at her hands. "About the ranch," she said. Eleanor set down the coffee she had been holding. "They haven't waited a week," she said. 3 days, May said quietly. Eleanor looked at the wall at the spot where Daniel's rifle hung, the one he had carried for 15 years before he became sheriff, and had kept on that wall because he said looking at it reminded him of where he came from. She had taken it down after the funeral and then put it back because the empty space was worse than the weight of what it meant. "Tell me what they said," Eleanor said. May told her. The territorial law in question was old enough that half the council had apparently not known it existed before Victor Blackwell's lawyer had brought it to the judge's attention. It read simply enough: a widow without a male heir, who could not demonstrate sufficient means of independent property management, could be required under the provisions of the 1871 Montana Territorial Act to either sell the property within 30 days or transfer management to a legally recognized male guardian. A male guardian. Eleanor had been managing the Hayes Ranch for 17 years. She had kept the account since year 2, when Daniel admitted that numbers made his eyes cross and handed her the ledger with the relief of a man being pardoned. She had negotiated the cattle contracts for the past 8 years. She had hired and managed the ranch hands. She had identified the water rights dispute with the Morrison property 2 years ago and resolved it before it became litigation. She had done all of this alongside everything else: the cooking, the mending, the community work, the 18 months of nursing Daniel through the illness that had taken most of his strength before the shooting took the rest. She had done it all. The law did not care. "What's the council's position?" she said. "Mixed," May said carefully. "Some of them think it's unnecessary. Judge Harlan says the law is the law and his hands are tied." She paused. Victor Blackwell was at the meeting. Eleanor looked at her. "He was there," she said. "Yes," May said. "He didn't speak. He just attended." Eleanor understood the shape of it then. Victor Blackwell had been trying to acquire the Hayes Ranch for 4 years. Daniel had refused every offer. Victor was a patient man. He had always been patient. It was one of the things that made him dangerous, and he had been waiting for an opportunity. Daniel's death had given him one. He had not manufactured the law. He had simply known it existed and waited until it was useful. "When is the hearing?" Eleanor said. "Wednesday," May said. "Judge Harlan's courthouse, 10 o'clock. Eleanor nodded. "Thank you, May," she said. May left. Eleanor sat in the kitchen for a long time. She was not going to cry. She had been crying for 3 days. Proper, honest grief for a man she had loved and built a life with and was not finished loving, and she was done with it for now. Not because she was finished grieving, but because crying was not going to help with Victor Blackwell or Judge Harlan or the 1871 Montana Territorial Act. She went to Daniel's office. She had not been in it since he died. She had walked past the door and thought about going in and walked past again. But now she went in and sat at his desk and opened the drawers, because if there was anything in this room that was going to help her, she needed to find it before Wednesday. The drawers were organized in Daniel's way, which was not her way. Not the careful, systematic filing she would have used, but a system that made sense to him, organized by feeling rather than category things, grouped by what they meant rather than what they were. She had always found this endearing. Today, it meant she had to read everything she touched to understand where it belonged. She was in the third drawer when she found the file. It was not labeled. It was a plain folder tucked under what appeared to be routine correspondence. And when she opened it, she found pages of Daniel's handwriting dense fast, the writing he used when he was thinking too quickly to be tidy. She started reading. She read for 40 minutes. She was still reading when she heard hoofbeats outside. Eleanor was at the door before the rider had fully dismounted. She did not know who she expected, one of the council members perhaps, or a messenger from Judge Harlan. She did not expect what she found. The man who stood at the bottom of her porch steps was tall and lean, in a way that suggested years of outdoor work rather than an easy life. He had a hat that had seen considerable weather and a coat that had seen more. He looked at her with gray eyes that held the specific quality of someone who had learned to be careful about where their attention landed. She did not know him. "Mrs. Hayes," he said. His voice was even, not apologetic, not aggressive, simply there. "Yes," she said. "My name is Thomas Reed," he said. "I knew your husband." Eleanor studied him. "He never mentioned you." "No," Thomas said. "He wouldn't have. We worked together on something that wasn't something he talked about publicly." He paused. "I heard what happened at the council meeting Friday. I heard what Blackwell is doing." "Then you know more than most people," she said. "The hearing isn't until Wednesday." "I know," he said. "That's why I came today." She looked at him for a long moment. "What do you want, Mr. Reed?" he said. "I want to help." "A lot of people say that," she said. "What they usually mean is they want to help themselves to something of mine." He held her gaze. He did not flinch from the directness. "I know," he said. "I understand why you'd think that." A pause. "Can I tell you what I know about Daniel's investigation?" Something moved in her chest. Not quite cold, not quite fear. The specific sensation of a thing becoming more complicated than it already was. "Come inside," she said. She had coffee on and 2 cups on the table before he had fully settled into the chair. She did not do this out of hospitality. She did it because her hands needed something to do while she processed what he had already said, and making coffee was the thing her hands knew how to do when her mind was working. Thomas Reed sat in the chair across from her and looked at the table and then at her and said, "Daniel was investigating Victor Blackwell." "I found a file," she said. He looked up sharply. "Tonight," she said. "In his desk. I've been reading it for the past hour." "What does it say?" Thomas said. "It says he believed Blackwell had been systematically manipulating land sales across the territory," she said, "forcing small ranchers to sell by creating problems, legal problems, water problems, access problems that made their land untenable." She paused. "It says he had been gathering evidence for 8 months. He found it," Thomas said. "More than what's in those notes. He found the actual documentation, contracts, payments, the names of the people Blackwell used to pressure the families." He paused. "He told me 3 weeks before he died that he had enough." Eleanor put her coffee cup down. 3 weeks before he died," she said. "Yes. And then he was shot by a man who supposedly robbed him," she said. "A man who was found dead 2 days later. From drink," the deputy said. "Yes," Thomas said. The kitchen was very quiet. "You think Daniel was killed because of the investigation?" she said. "I believe it," he said. "I can't prove it yet. The proof is what Daniel found, and I don't know where he put it." Eleanor looked at the wall. "And now Blackwell is using a territorial law to force me off this property," she said. The property where Daniel might have hidden the documentation he spent 8 months gathering. Thomas said nothing. He wants the ranch, Eleanor said. Not because of the land, because of what might be on it. Yes, Thomas said. That's what I believe. She looked at him. What is your proposal, Mr. Reed? She said. He looked at the table, not at her at the table in the way of a man who was about to say something he had been thinking about for a long time and was choosing the words carefully. The law requires you to have a male guardian, or a husband, he said. I'm suggesting a third option. Which is, she said. Me, he said. A legal marriage on paper. It satisfies the territorial requirement. You keep full control of the ranch, all decisions, all authority, everything remains yours. I move into the bunkhouse or a room in the house if you prefer, and I help you find what Daniel hid. He paused. When the evidence is found and Blackwell is dealt with, we dissolve the arrangement however is best for you. Eleanor looked at him for a long time. You want to marry me, she said, to help me keep my ranch, while you also look for evidence that could expose a man who may have killed my husband. Yes, he said. Why? She said. Specifically, why you? Why does any of this require your participation? He looked up at her then. Because I promised Daniel, he said. Before he died. He called me to the jail I was passing through Blackwater Ridge. He knew I was there. He sent for me. He told me about the investigation, and he told me he was getting close. He said if anything happened to him, someone needed to finish it. He paused. He asked me specifically. Why you specifically? She said. Something moved through Thomas's face, not quite pain, not quite determination. Both. Because I was with him years ago on another case, he said. A case where something went wrong, where I wasn't fast enough. He stopped. He trusted me because of that which I never understood. But he trusted me. What happened on the other case? She said. He was quiet for a moment. A man died who didn't have to, he said. Because I made a wrong call. He looked at the table. Daniel was the one who told me it wasn't my fault. I didn't believe him then. I still don't entirely believe him. But I believed the promise I made him. Eleanor sat with this. She was looking at a man who had ridden to a ranch on the Sunday after her husband's funeral with a proposal that was either the strangest act of loyalty she had ever encountered or the most elaborate deception she had ever been offered. She was a practical woman. Daniel had always said she was the most practical person he knew, and she had always taken this as the compliment it was intended to be, and practical women evaluated situations based on the evidence available. The evidence available was this. Thomas Reed knew things about Daniel's investigation that were not public knowledge. He had details about the final conversation that only someone who had been there could have. He had a reason for his involvement that did not include any obvious personal gain. The ranch would go to her, not to him. The evidence, when found, would go to the territorial authorities, not to him. She did not know if he was telling the truth. She knew that the alternative was Wednesday's hearing, and whatever Judge Harlan decided, and Victor Blackwell's patience finally being rewarded. I have conditions, she said. Thomas looked up. The ranch is mine, she said. Every decision, every contract, every hiring and firing. You do nothing regarding this ranch's operations without my agreement. Understood, he said. You tell me everything you know about Daniel's investigation, she said. Not parts of it. All of it. Starting tonight. All right, he said. And if I decide this arrangement needs to end, she said, for any reason it ends. Without argument. He looked at her steadily. Yes, he said. She extended her hand across the table. He shook it. It was, she thought, the most unusual agreement she had ever made. But it was hers. She had set the terms, she had defined the conditions, she had made the decision. No one had made it for her. That at least was something. Wednesday came with a cold that settled into everything. Eleanor drove herself to the courthouse. She had offered to let Thomas ride alongside, and he had come, but she had driven the wagon herself because she had been driving her own wagon for 17 years, and was not about to change that because a town full of people thought she needed managing. The courthouse was full. That was the first thing she noticed, more people than she expected, which meant word had spread more widely than May's quiet warning had suggested. The town of Blackwater Ridge was not large, but every available seat was taken, and there were people standing along the walls, and the quality of attention in the room was the particular quality of a room that expected something to happen, and was there to see it. Judge Harlan was behind his bench, a solid, careful man who had been on that bench for 12 years, and who Eleanor had always respected for the specific reason that he seemed to believe his job was to apply the law rather than to improve on it, which was a quality she now found considerably less reassuring. Victor Blackwell was in the front row. He looked at Eleanor when she came in. He nodded. She did not nod back. She sat down in the chair reserved for her at the table the bailiff had indicated, and she placed Daniel's ledger on the table in front of her and put both hands on top of it. Thomas sat behind her 1 row back in the seat she had told him to take. Judge Harlan called the room to order. He outlined the situation with the precise efficiency of a man who had read the law 3 times and was comfortable with it. The 1871 Territorial Act, the 30-day provision, the requirement for a male guardian or a spouse. He said, "Mrs. Hayes, you have been informed of these requirements." "I have," she said. "Do you have a response?" "I have several," she said. She stood. She did not ask permission to stand. She simply stood, the way she had always stood when she had something to say, and the room's attention shifted to her with the specific shift of a crowd that had been expecting to watch a woman be told what was going to happen to her and was encountering something different. She said, "I have managed this ranch's accounts, contracts, labor, and legal affairs for the past 11 years. I can produce records demonstrating this management. The ranch is solvent, the taxes are current, and there is no creditor, no dispute, and no legal matter that is unresolved." She looked at Judge Harlan directly. "The law you are invoking was written to protect widows who were incapable of managing their affairs. I am not incapable. I am simply inconvenient to a man who has been trying to acquire this property for 4 years." Someone in the back of the room made a sound. Victor Blackwell did not move. "Mrs. Hayes," Judge Harlan said carefully, "the law does not require." "Oh, the law requires a determination of capacity," she said. "I am prepared to demonstrate capacity. I am also prepared to demonstrate that this proceeding was initiated not by genuine concern for my welfare, but by the legal counsel of Victor Blackwell, who has made 4 formal offers to purchase the Hayes Ranch since 2001 and been refused 4 times. She paused. "If the court is interested in the dates and amounts of those offers, I have them in this ledger." The room was very still. Judge Harlan said, "That is not Your Honor." The voice came from behind her. Thomas Reed had stood up. Eleanor had not expected this. She turned slightly. He was standing with his hat in his hands and his back straight, and the expression of a man who had decided something and was done deliberating. "My name is Thomas Reed," he said. "I have been a resident of this territory for 11 years. I am a man without a criminal record, a debt, or a dispute outstanding, and I am Mrs. Hayes's husband." The room exploded, not all at once in the staggered, overlapping way that a crowd exploded when it processed something in pieces. Several people spoke at once. Someone near the front said something that was swallowed by the general noise. Victor Blackwell was the only person in the room who did not move, who sat in the front row with his hands on his knees and his face doing the specific thing that Victor Blackwell's face did when something had gone differently than he had planned. Judge Harlan banged his gavel. The room quieted. "Mr. Reed," the judge said carefully, "you are claiming to be this woman's husband." "We were married Monday," Thomas said. "By Reverend Collins at the church. He has the record. I have the certificate." He produced it from his coat pocket. He walked to the clerk's table and placed it there. "If the law requires Mrs. Hayes to have a husband, she has one." Judge Harlan looked at the certificate. He looked at Eleanor. He looked at Thomas. He looked at Victor Blackwell, which was the look that told Eleanor the most, the look of a man checking whether his instructions had changed. Victor Blackwell gave nothing back. Judge Harlan said, "I will need time to review this. The hearing is adjourned until Friday." The gavel came down. Eleanor stood at the table while the room broke apart around her. She did not look at Blackwell. She looked at Thomas, who was coming toward her through the dispersing crowd, with the expression of a man who had done what he planned to do and was now waiting to be told if he had done it right. She said very quietly, when he was close enough to hear, "You were supposed to wait until I called on you." "I know," he said. "You were doing fine. He paused. "He was sitting there smiling, and you were standing there alone, and I couldn't—" "I was not alone," she said. He looked at her. "I know," he said. "I'm sorry." She looked at him for a moment, at the man who had just stood up in front of a room full of people and staked his own reputation on a marriage that was 3 days old. "Don't apologize to me," she said. "Save it for the times when you do something I actually object to." She picked up the ledger. She walked out of the courthouse. Behind her, she could feel the room's attention, the recalibration of a community that had expected one thing and gotten another, that had expected a widow to be managed, and had watched her instead set terms and produce certificates and stare down Victor Blackwell in his front row seat. She did not look back, but she heard Thomas's footsteps behind her, steady, unhurried present, and she thought about Daniel saying, "Someone needs to finish what I started," to a man he trusted for reasons she didn't yet fully understand. And she thought about the file in the third drawer of Daniel's desk, and she thought about whatever evidence her husband had hidden somewhere on this ranch before someone made sure he couldn't deliver it himself. She had 30 days, or she had no days at all depending on how Friday went. Either way, she had work to do. And the man walking behind her, the ghost of Blackwater Ridge, the lonely cowboy, the man with gray eyes and a promise to keep, was the most unlikely ally she had ever acquired. She was going to find out if he was worth keeping. She was going to find out if he was worth keeping, and Friday gave her the first real answer, though not in the way she expected. Judge Harlan reviewed the marriage certificate for 48 hours, and on Friday morning announced that the arrangement satisfied the requirements of the 1871 Territorial Act. The Hayes Ranch was not subject to forced sale or mandatory guardianship. The matter was legally speaking resolved. Victor Blackwell's lawyer objected on 3 grounds. Judge Harlan overruled all 3. Blackwell himself said nothing. That was the part that stayed with Eleanor on the drive home, not the ruling which she had been reasonably confident about once Thomas produced the certificate, but Blackwell's silence. A man who lost a legal maneuver and said nothing was not a man who had accepted defeat. He was a man who was already planning the next move. Thomas drove the wagon on the way back. She let him not because she needed him to, but because her hands were occupied with the file she had brought from Daniel's desk, and which she had been reading again on the way into town. She was looking for something specific, a reference, a location, anything that pointed to where Daniel might have put the actual documentation, rather than his notes about it. "He mentions a name," she said without looking up. "Wade Carver. He wrote it 3 times in the margins. Do you know it?" Thomas was quiet for a moment. "Carver managed the land sales for the Morrison property 2 years ago," he said. "The deal that fell through." Eleanor looked up. "The Morrison property. That's the water rights dispute I resolved." "What do you mean?" Thomas said. "I identified a water rights conflict between the Hayes land and the Morrison property," she said. "I resolved it before it became litigation. The sale fell through because the buyer, I never knew who the buyer was. The attorney wouldn't disclose it, withdrew after the water rights issue was established." She paused. "The buyer was Blackwell." Thomas looked at the road ahead. "Daniel's notes say Carver manipulated the Morrison dispute deliberately," Eleanor said. "Created the problem on purpose to make the Morrison land harder to sell to anyone except Blackwell, who had the resources to absorb the legal cost." She paused. "Except I fixed it before Blackwell could buy." "Which means Blackwell knows you fixed it," Thomas said. "He knows you understand how the manipulation works. And he knows I have Daniel's notes," she said. "Or he suspects it." She folded the file. "That's why he wants the ranch. Not just because Daniel was close to exposing him. Because I might be able to finish what Daniel started." Thomas pulled the wagon to a stop at the ranch gate. He looked at her. "Can you?" he said. She met his gaze. I don't know yet, she said. Ask me again in a week. She got down from the wagon herself and walked to the house. The ranch hands were waiting. 3 of them gathered near the barn with the expressions of men who had been watching the road and were relieved to see the wagon return. Their names were Cal, Jimmy, and Pete, and Eleanor had managed all 3 of them for years. Cal had been with Daniel since before the sheriff's office. Jimmy had come 3 years ago on a recommendation from a neighboring rancher. Pete was the youngest, barely 20, who had arrived in the spring looking for work and had stayed because Eleanor had given him a fair wage and a clear set of expectations. She told them the hearing had gone their way. Cal said, "Good," with the flat certainty of a man who had been expecting this, but was glad to have it confirmed. Jimmy said, "Blackwell's going to try something else." "Yes," Eleanor said. "He will. When he does, I want to know about it before it becomes a problem. If any of you hear anything in town, I want to know." All 3 of them nodded. She looked at Thomas, standing slightly apart. "This is Thomas Reed," she said. "He's going to be working with us for a while." 3 sets of eyes assessed Thomas with the practical thoroughness of men who worked with their hands and knew what to look for. Thomas met the assessment without performing anything. He did not try to establish authority or offer credentials or do any of the things that men sometimes did when they wanted other men to accept them. He simply stood there. Cal looked at Eleanor. "He know cattle. He knows enough," Thomas said. Cal looked at Thomas directly. "What does enough mean?" "It means I've driven 2 herds across Montana, and I know the difference between a fence that's been cut and a fence that's rotted through," Thomas said. "I know which problems need fixing fast and which ones can wait, and I know to ask when I'm not sure." He paused. "Is that sufficient?" Cal considered him for a long moment. "For now," he said. He went back to the barn. Jimmy and Pete followed. Eleanor said quietly to Thomas, "That was the right answer." "He wasn't asking about cattle," Thomas said. "No," she said. "He wasn't." She went inside. The first week established the pattern of what their arrangement was going to look like in practice, which was different in several ways from what Eleanor had expected, and different in several more from what the town expected, which was itself something worth paying attention to. What the town expected, May reported on Thursday afternoon, was that Thomas Reed would either take over the ranch operations, confirming the theory that he had married Eleanor for control of the property, or would be found useless and leave within a fortnight, confirming the theory that the whole arrangement was a desperate measure that would collapse under its own impracticality. What actually happened was neither. Thomas worked. That was the simplest description of the first week. He rose before Eleanor and was already in the barn or on the fence lines when she came out in the morning. He did not give orders. He fixed the things that needed fixing and asked about the things he wasn't certain of, and checked with Eleanor before he made any decision that had implications beyond the immediate physical task. He ate with the hands when they worked late, and ate at the house when they didn't, and both times he talked less than anyone else at the table and listened considerably more. On the 3rd evening, Eleanor came out of the kitchen to find him at Daniel's fence, the section along the north pasture that Daniel had built himself the year before his illness. Started the section Eleanor had not been able to bring herself to repair when a section of it came down in the October storm, because fixing it felt like erasing something. Thomas was not fixing it. He was standing at the break, looking at it with his hands in his pockets. She went to stand beside him. "The timber's still good," he said. "Whoever put this up knew what they were doing." "Daniel built it himself," she said. Thomas was quiet. "It came down in October," she said. "I haven't had the heart to fix it." "I won't touch it without your say," he said. "Just wanted to know what we were looking at." She looked at the broken section. "Fix it," she said. He would have wanted it fixed. Thomas nodded. He did not move immediately. He stood there for another moment, looking at the fence that Daniel had built, and she understood without him saying it that he was not just looking at timber. He was paying his own kind of respect to a man he had known and lost. She went back inside, but she thought about it. The investigation was moving in ways that were slower than she wanted. She and Thomas had gone through Daniel's office together on 2 evenings systematically, the way she went through accounts, following every notation to its source. The file in the 3rd drawer was as she had suspected, notes rather than evidence. Daniel had documented what he believed and what he suspected, but the actual proof, the contracts, the payments, the paper trail that would hold up in front of a territorial judge, was somewhere else. Thomas had theories. Daniel was careful, he said on the 2nd evening. He knew Blackwell had legal resources and connections. He wouldn't have kept the actual evidence anywhere that could be accessed if something happened to him. He paused. He would have kept it somewhere that only someone who knew him very specifically would think to look. He told me once, Eleanor said slowly, that the most secure safe was one that didn't look like a safe. Thomas looked at her. He said his grandfather used to hide money in plain sight, she said. In something everyone saw every day and never thought twice about. She looked at the walls of the office. He said people always looked for the locked drawer. They never looked at what was in front of them. Thomas stood up. He looked at the room. What did Daniel look at every day? He said. Eleanor looked too. The desk. The bookshelf. The rifle on the wall, the one she had taken down and put back. The ledger she kept on the side table. The photograph on the mantelpiece, her and Daniel at their first cattle sale, both of them younger and less complicated. She stopped. The photograph. She crossed to the mantelpiece. The photograph was in a wooden frame, a good frame heavier than it needed to be for a photograph of that size. Daniel had bought the frame himself, which she had thought at the time was unusual, because Daniel was not a man who put money into decorative items. She lifted it. She turned it over. The back of the frame had a panel that was slightly proud of the wood around it. Thomas was beside her before she had fully processed what she was looking at. He took the frame carefully and pressed the panel. It released a simple mechanism, nothing elaborate, and the back came free. Behind it was a folded document. Several folded documents. Eleanor sat down. Her hands were not steady, and she was not going to pretend they were. She set the documents on Daniel's desk, and she unfolded them one by one, while Thomas stood close enough to read over her shoulder, but not so close that he was crowding her. What they found was everything. Contracts showing Blackwell's company as the silent buyer in 14 land transactions across the territory. Payment records showing money flowing to Wade Carver and 3 other men who had appeared in Daniel's notes as facilitators. Correspondence between Blackwell's lawyer and a territorial government official that strongly suggested the 1871 Territorial Act had been raised specifically in regard to the Hayes Ranch, not as a general provision, but as a targeted instrument. And a letter, in Daniel's handwriting, addressed to Eleanor. She recognized the date. It was written 2 weeks before he died. Eleanor, if you're reading this, something happened before I could finish it. I'm sorry. I want you to know I tried to come home to you first, but I ran out of time. Everything you need is in front of you. It always has been. Take it to Judge Morrison in Helena, not Harlan. Harlan is not corrupt, but he is cautious, and cautious men do favors for powerful ones. Morrison is honest. He will listen. The man named Reed, if he comes, trust him. I know you'll question it. You question everything, which is one of the things I've always loved about you. But trust him. He's the best man I've ever worked with and the most alone I've ever seen. Help him too if you can. I love you. I always will. Daniel. Eleanor did not cry. She read the letter once. She folded it carefully. She put it with the other documents. Then she said, "He knew it was dangerous. He prepared for the possibility." "Yes," Thomas said. "He told me to trust you," she said. Thomas said nothing. "He also told me to help you," she said. "He called you the most alone he'd ever seen." She looked at Thomas directly. "Why?" Thomas looked at the desk. He was quiet for long enough that she thought he might not answer. "After the case that went wrong," he said finally, I stopped. I stopped being in places where people knew me. I moved between jobs. I didn't stay anywhere long enough for it to matter." He paused. "Daniel found me in a situation that was heading nowhere good, and he offered me work. When I left, he told me I was always welcome in Blackwater Ridge." He paused again. "I didn't come back until he was already dead." "Why didn't you come sooner?" she said. "Because I didn't think I was welcome anywhere specific," he said. "I thought that was—" He stopped. "I thought that was just who I was." She looked at him for a long moment. "Daniel was rarely wrong about people," she said. "He was wrong sometimes, but rarely." Thomas looked at her. "I'm not telling you to stop being alone," she said. "I'm telling you, he knew you better than you knew yourself apparently, and he trusted you with the most important thing he had." "You," Thomas said. "His investigation," she said. He almost smiled. "Helena," she said. "Judge Morrison, how soon can we move?" "We need to think about how we move," Thomas said. "If Blackwell knows we found something, and he may suspect it, if he's watching the ranch." "He is watching the ranch," she said. "Cal told me 2 days ago there's been a rider on the North Ridge. Stays far enough out to not be on our land, but close enough to see who comes and goes." Thomas stood up. "Then we don't go to Helena directly," he said. "We go somewhere else first and change direction." "You've done this before," she said. "Moved people safely through territory where someone was watching," he said. "Yes." "The case that went wrong," she said. He looked at her. "Yes," he said. She did not press it further, but she filed it. The second week brought a different kind of complication. It arrived in the form of Judith Carver, Wade Carver's wife, a small woman in her 40s, who appeared at the ranch door on a Tuesday morning when Thomas was out on the fence line and Eleanor was alone in the kitchen. She stood on the porch, and when Eleanor opened the door, she said without any introduction, "My husband is afraid of what's going to happen to him when this comes out. He wants to talk." Eleanor looked at her. "Come in," she said. Judith Carver came in and sat at the kitchen table and told Eleanor in a voice that was steady but effortful that her husband had been involved with Blackwell's land scheme for 3 years. He had not initiated it. Blackwell had approached him, had made it seem like a legitimate business arrangement, and by the time Wade understood what he was part of, he was in too deep to withdraw without consequences he was afraid of. "He didn't know about the sheriff," Judith said. "When Daniel Hayes was killed, Wade—" She stopped. "He hasn't slept a full night since." "What does he want?" Eleanor said. "He wants to testify," Judith said, "to whoever will listen. He wants to tell everything he knows, and he knows a great deal. He was present for meetings I don't think Blackwell would want documented." She looked at Eleanor directly. "He wants protection for our family in exchange." Eleanor was quiet. "Why did you come to me?" she said. "Why not the judge?" "Because Judge Harlan is cautious," Judith said, "and cautious men do favors for powerful ones." Eleanor looked at her. That was Daniel's exact phrase. "Where did you hear that?" she said. Judith looked at the table. "Daniel said it to Wade once," she said, "about 3 months before he died. Wade was trying to work up the courage to tell the sheriff what he knew, and Daniel said he said, 'I understand your hesitation. Harlan is cautious, and cautious men do favors for powerful ones. But there's a judge in Helena.' He said there was a judge in Helena who was honest." Eleanor's hands were very still on the table. "Daniel tried to recruit your husband," she said. "Yes?" Judith said. "Wade wasn't ready then. He's ready now." She paused. "Because of what's been happening to you. Because if a man like Blackwell can come after the sheriff's widow with a territorial law 3 days after the funeral—" Her voice broke slightly. She controlled it. "Wade says that's a man who stopped being careful, and a man who stopped being careful is going to eventually do something that can't be taken back." Eleanor looked at Judith Carver for a long moment. "I need to speak with my husband," she said, "about how we proceed." Judith nodded. She stood to leave. At the door she said, "Mrs. Hayes, Daniel talked about you. Eleanor waited. He said you were the most capable person he had ever worked alongside, Judith said. He said the biggest mistake he ever made in the early years of the ranch was not telling you sooner that you were his actual partner. She paused. He said he made up for it eventually. Eleanor said he did. Judith left. Eleanor sat at the kitchen table for a long time. Then she went to find Thomas. He was at the north fence the section Daniel had built, now repaired, the timber standing cleanly against the Montana sky. He was checking the posts when she came up, running his hand along the wood to feel if the setting was right. Wade Carver's wife came, she said. He turned. She told him everything. When she finished, he was quiet for a moment. She's not lying, he said. I knew Carver was involved. Daniel had mentioned his name as someone who might turn if the situation became clear enough. The situation is becoming clear enough, Eleanor said. Yes, he said. Helena, she said. Wade Carver's testimony, plus what we found in the photograph frame. That's enough to take to Judge Morrison. It might be enough, he said carefully. We still need to be careful about how we move. If Blackwell knows we have the documentation, he suspects, she said. You said so yourself. He's had a man on the North Ridge for 2 weeks. Thomas looked at the repaired fence. Then we move soon, he said. Before he does. When? She said. I need 3 days to set something up, he said. A route, a way to get the documents and the Carver testimony to Helena without it being obvious where we're going. 3 days, she said. Yes. She looked at him. He left me a letter, she said, in the photograph frame with the documents. Thomas looked at her. He said to trust you, she said. He said to help you too. She paused. He was right about the first part. I'm still working on the second. Thomas held her gaze. What does the second part look like? He said. She thought about it. I think it looks like telling you that you are not required to carry what went wrong on that case for the rest of your life, she said. I think it looks like Daniel already told you that, and you didn't believe him. So I'm telling you again. Thomas was very still. You don't know what happened, he said. No, she said. I know you think about it every day. I know it's the reason you've been alone for however long it's been. And I know Daniel trusted you completely in spite of it, which means he looked at whatever it was and decided it didn't define you. She held his gaze. He was a good judge of people. Thomas looked at the fence. He was, he said. So trust his judgment, she said, about the case and about yourself. She walked back to the house. She did not look back, but she heard him after a moment behind her, the sound of him beginning to work again. The steady, purposeful sound of a man with something to do and a reason to do it. She thought about Daniel's letter. He's the best man I've ever worked with and the most alone I've ever seen. Help him too if you can. She thought she was beginning to understand what Daniel had meant, and she thought she might be beginning to understand something else, something she was not ready to name, something that lived in the way she had walked to the fence line and said what she had said without planning to say it, something in the fact that she had thought about his face twice already today and had noticed the thinking. She was not ready to name it. She went back to Daniel's office and picked up the documents and began planning for Helena. But she thought about it anyway, because the most practical thing about Eleanor Hayes had always been her honesty with herself about what was true, about what was happening, about what was changing in the world in front of her. Something was changing. She filed it under, not yet, and went back to work, which was the only thing she knew how to do when something was changing that she wasn't ready to name, which was also the thing that had always saved her the forward motion of practical necessity, pulling her past the moments she didn't know how to stand still in. The 3 days Thomas asked for produced a plan. He laid it out at the kitchen table on Thursday evening with Cal present, because Cal had been with Daniel long enough to be trusted, and because the plan required someone to stay at the ranch while they were gone, and Eleanor wanted Cal to understand why. We go north first, Thomas said. Not toward Helena, Toward the Kellerman property, the Kellermans have been good neighbors. They won't ask questions, and we can rest the horses there without it being visible from the ridge where Blackwell's man has been watching." He paused. "Then we cut south through the Valley Pass. It adds a day to the journey, but it means anyone following us from the ridge has to make a wide correction, and we'll see them before they see us." Cal said, "And Carver. He and his wife leave separately," Thomas said. "Different route, different day. They arrive in Helena 2 days after us. By the time they arrive, we'll have spoken to Morrison and established the record." Eleanor said, "You're keeping Carver and the documents separate." "If something happens to us on the road," Thomas said, "the documents are still coming. If something happens to the documents, Carver's testimony is still coming." He paused. "Blackwell can't stop both." Cal looked at Eleanor. "You comfortable with this?" "I'm comfortable with the logic," she said. "I have questions about the Valley Pass. That route adds exposure as well as time." "Tell me what you're thinking," Thomas said. She spread the territory map on the table. She had been looking at it for 2 days. "The Valley Pass requires us to cross the Morrison Creek at 2 points," she said. "This time of year, the first crossing is manageable. The second," she tapped the map. "In a wet fall, that crossing is unpredictable. If we get delayed at the second crossing, we lose the time advantage." Thomas looked at the map. He looked at Cal. Cal said, "She's right. I've lost 3 days at that crossing in October." Thomas studied the map for a moment. "The Alderson Trail," he said. "It adds distance but avoids the creek entirely. The problem is, it goes closer to Blackwell's eastern grazing land." "How much closer?" Eleanor said. "Half a mile," he said. "If he has riders out there." "He won't," Cal said. "His eastern grazing is winter pasture. He moves the cattle off it in October. His riders won't be out there before first snow." Thomas looked at Eleanor. She looked at the map. "The Alderson Trail," she said. "We leave Saturday." Thomas nodded. Cal said, "I'll keep the hands busy enough that anyone watching the ranch sees normal activity." "Thank you, Cal," Eleanor said. Cal left. Thomas started to roll up the map. "Thomas," she said. He stopped. "The case that went wrong," she said. "I'm not asking you to tell me now, but when you're ready, I'd like to know." He was quiet for a moment. "Why?" he said. "Because Daniel trusted you with something that mattered more to him than anything else," she said. "And because I'd like to understand who I'm trusting." He looked at the map in his hands. "It was a family," he said. "A man and his wife and their 2 children. We were moving them out of a situation, a man who was threatening them, a land dispute that had become dangerous. I was responsible for getting them from one county to the next safely." He stopped. "We were attacked on the road. I made a decision about which direction to move. I thought east was safer. I was wrong." He paused. "The man, the husband, was shot. He survived, but only barely, and he walked with a limp for the rest of his life. And the wife," Eleanor said. "The children. Safe," he said. "All 3 of them. Because of the decision I made." He paused. "Which is the part I can never quite hold both at once. I kept 3 people safe, and I got 1 person hurt. Daniel said that was the only possible outcome given what we knew at the time. He said I made the best decision available, and it wasn't perfect, and that's what decisions under pressure are, never perfect." "He was right," Eleanor said. "I know," Thomas said. "Knowing it and believing it are different things." "Yes," she said. "They are." They looked at each other. Something shifted in the space between them. Subtle, barely there. The kind of shift that happened when 2 people who had been talking around a thing finally talked near enough to it, that the thing became visible between them. Eleanor looked at the table. "Saturday," she said. "Saturday?" he said. They left before dawn. The ranch was still dark when Eleanor and Thomas put the horses on the road, the documents wrapped in oilcloth inside her saddlebag, along with Daniel's letter, which she had decided she was not leaving behind. Cal had the other hands up, and working by the time they were out of sight, a deliberate noise of ordinary activity, designed for anyone watching the ridge to read as a normal morning. The first 2 hours were cold and quiet. Thomas rode slightly ahead when the trail was narrow and slightly behind when it widened, not leading, not following, simply adjusting to the terrain. She noticed this. It was the same quality he had on the ranch, reading what the situation needed rather than defaulting to a fixed position. Somewhere in the second hour, she said, "What did Daniel tell you about me?" "He said you kept the accounts better than anyone he had ever seen," Thomas said. "He said you had a mind for patterns, for seeing what was connected when other people only saw individual facts." A pause. "He said he learned to trust your instincts more than his own on anything that required that kind of thinking." "He never told me that," she said. "He said he should have told you sooner and more often," Thomas said. "He said it was one of his genuine regrets." She was quiet. "He told you his regrets," she said. "We had a long night in a cold jail cell waiting for a situation to resolve," Thomas said. "Men talk differently in those circumstances." "What else did he tell you?" Thomas rode without speaking for a moment. "He told me he was afraid," he said, "about the investigation, not for himself, for you." He paused. "He said if something happened to him before he finished it, he didn't know if you'd be protected. He said the law was not reliable for women in his position and that the territory had too many Victor Blackwells and not enough judges he trusted." He paused again. "He said he wanted to find you a way to be safe that didn't depend on him." Eleanor looked at the road ahead. "He found it," she said, "in the most unusual possible form." "Yes," Thomas said. "He did." They reached the Kellerman property by mid-morning. Old Jonas Kellerman was exactly the kind of man who did not ask questions about why the sheriff's widow and a cowboy he didn't recognize needed to rest their horses for 2 hours and leave by a different road than they came in on. He fed them and their horses and talked about the weather and asked if the Hayes North pasture was recovering well from the dry summer, and when they left, he said only, "Safe road." Eleanor thought she might like Jonas Kellerman more than almost anyone else she had met recently. The Alderson Trail ran through territory she knew less well. She had ridden it twice in the early years of the ranch before Daniel's illness, when they had occasionally gone to the southeastern markets together. It was not a difficult trail, but it was a lonely one, the kind of road that went through country that had not yet decided to be anything, and in the Montana October, it had a quality of isolation that was either peaceful or ominous, depending on your circumstances. Her circumstances made it feel slightly ominous. 3 hours in, Thomas pulled up. She pulled up beside him. "Behind us," he said, very quietly. "About a mile back. I've been watching for 20 minutes. She kept her eyes forward. "One rider." "Two," he said. "They're staying at the same distance, not closing." "Blackwell's men," she said. "Probably," he said. "Or scouts. Testing whether we notice." He paused. "If they were going to take the documents, they'd have done it before now. We're in open country. This is the easiest ground we've been on since we left." "So they're watching," she said. "Tracking where we're going." "Yes," he said. "Which means Blackwell doesn't know our destination. He suspected we'd move, but he doesn't know Morrison is in Helena." He paused. "We need to give them something to follow that isn't Helena." She thought about it. "The Hargrove Trading Post," she said. "It's northeast of here. Legitimate reason for a ranch supply run. If they see us head that direction. And then we cut south after dark," he said, "when they've reported back that we went to Hargrove. Can we make Helena by the following afternoon on that route?" "If we ride through the night," he said. "Can you do that?" He looked at her. "Can you?" "I've delivered calves through the night in January," she said. "I can ride." "Then yes," he said. "We can." They turned northeast. The riders behind them followed for another hour, and then when the Hargrove Trading Post came into view, they peeled away. Thomas saw them go and told Eleanor without looking back. She filed the information and kept writing. At the Hargrove Post, she bought 2 things she didn't need, and a bag of oats she did need, and they rested the horses for 30 minutes and then rode on, and when dark came, they cut south. The night was cold and clear and enormous, in the way Montana nights were enormous. The sky so full of stars it created its own dim light, and they rode through it in the particular companionship of two people who had spent a month building trust through daily reality, and who now found themselves in the specific situation where that trust was the most important thing available. Somewhere in the middle of the night, Eleanor said, "He used to look at the stars when he couldn't sleep." Thomas said, "Daniel." "Yes," she said. "He'd come in and I'd ask where he'd been, and he'd say out looking at what's real. He said the stars reminded him that most of what people worried about was temporary." She paused. "I used to think that was either very wise or a man avoiding the practical implications of his problems." "Which did you decide?" Thomas said. "Both," she said. "It was genuinely wise, and also he sometimes avoided the practical implications." Thomas made a sound that was the closest thing to a laugh she had heard from him. She looked at him in the dark. It was, she thought, a good sound, the kind that came from something real rather than something performed. "What did you look at when you couldn't sleep?" she said. "When you were alone somewhere?" He was quiet. "Nothing specific," he said. "I'd usually just work, kept myself tired enough that sleep wasn't optional." "How long were you doing that?" she said. "Since the case," he said. "That was 8 years," he said. She absorbed this. 8 years of keeping himself too tired to think, too busy to feel the shape of an empty camp, too in motion to notice that the motion had become the point rather than the destination. "Thomas," she said. "I know," he said. "I know what it looks like from the outside." "I wasn't going to tell you what it looks like," she said. "I was going to say that Daniel was right about you being alone too long." She paused. 8 years is too long." He said nothing. She did not say anything else. But the quality of the silence that followed was different from the silences before, warmer, somehow the kind of silence that formed between people when something had been said that was going to take time to be answered, but that had been heard. They arrived in Helena in the late afternoon of the following day. Judge Morrison was a white-haired man in his 70s who received them in his office at the courthouse with the unhurried thoroughness of someone who had been waiting for this kind of thing to arrive for a while and was not surprised that it had. He read the documents. He read them for 40 minutes without speaking. Then he looked up at Eleanor. "Your husband spent 8 months on this," he said. "Yes," she said. "He understood what he was dealing with," Morrison said. "This is careful work, methodical. He was building something unassailable." He looked at the contract documents. "This is enough." "For Blackwell," Thomas said. "For Blackwell and Carver and 2 other men whose names appear in these records, and who I am going to be very interested to speak with," Morrison said. He looked at Eleanor. "You said Carver is prepared to testify." "He arrives tomorrow," she said. "With his wife." "Good," Morrison said. He set the documents down with the care of someone handling something valuable. "Mrs. Hayes, what your husband built here, and what you've brought to me, this is going to have significant consequences. For Blackwell, for the families he victimized, for this territory." He paused. "I want you to understand that once I begin acting on this, it will move quickly and it will be visible. Blackwell will know the investigation is open. He already suspects," she said. "He's had men watching the ranch." "Then we don't gain anything by moving slowly," Morrison said. He looked at Thomas. "Reed, Daniel spoke to me about you about 3 months before he died. He said if something happened to him, a man named Reed might bring something important." Thomas looked at the judge. "He said that," Thomas said. "He did?" Morrison said. "He said you were the only person in the territory he trusted completely to finish what he'd started." He paused. "He was right to trust you." Thomas said nothing, but something moved in his face, the specific private quality of a man receiving something he had needed for a very long time and had stopped expecting to receive. They stayed in Helena 2 nights. The return journey was quieter than the departure, not uncomfortable, but carrying the particular quality of a thing completed the specific change in air pressure that followed the resolution of something that had been building pressure for a long time. The documents were in Morrison's hands. Carver had arrived the second morning and been received and would be deposed within the week. The investigation was officially open under territorial authority. It was not finished, but it was begun in the right hands. They were a day out from the ranch when the storm hit. It came from the northwest the way Montana storms came in October fast, without extended warning, the sky changing character in an hour, from clear to the specific dark gray that meant business. Thomas saw it first and said so, and they had been pushing for the nearest shelter, a lined shack that Eleanor knew was on the edge of their own property, close enough to reach when the rain started. They made the shack with 20 minutes to spare before the full force arrived. It was small, the kind of structure built for necessity, rather than comfort. A roof that held a small iron stove that still functioned when Thomas got it going, with the wood stacked beside it, space enough for 2 people to be out of the rain. The horses were tied on the lee side of the shack, where the overhang gave them some protection. Eleanor had been unsaddling the horses when her hand caught on a broken piece of the saddle rigging. An edge she hadn't noticed, metal that had come loose sharp enough to cut cleanly across her palm. She did not make a sound. She pressed her hand closed and finished with the horse, because the horse needed to be settled, and then she came inside. Thomas saw it immediately. "Let me see," he said. "It's fine," she said. "Eleanor," he said. She opened her hand. It was not fine. It was not serious, not deep enough for genuine alarm, but it was bleeding steadily, and her hand was covered, and Thomas was already moving to his saddlebag for the cloth he kept there. She sat at the small table because her legs had decided they were done holding tension. He sat across from her. He took her hand. He cleaned the cut with the careful, deliberate attention of a man who had done this before. Not hurriedly, not performatively, just steadily and thoroughly, the way he did everything. She watched his hands working and thought about the fence posts and the ledgers and the horses in the barn, and all the other ways she had watched his hands work in the past month without naming what she was noticing. "Hold still," he said, though she had not moved. "I'm still," she said. He wrapped the cloth. He tied it. He did not release her hand immediately. She did not take it back. The storm outside was fully arrived. Rain against the roof, wind against the walls. The specific sound of weather that was indifferent to everything inside the walls it was pressing against. The stove was making the shack warm. The light was the specific, dim, warm light of a fire in a small space. "Thomas," she said. He looked at her. "What failed?" she said. "On the case. What specific decision do you still think about?" He looked at her hand in his. "I chose to move the family at night," he said. "I thought the cover of dark was safer. But they were in unfamiliar terrain, and the husband stumbled. That's how the attackers found their position. If we'd moved in daylight, they could have seen where they were going." He paused. "If I'd chosen daylight, the husband wouldn't have been shot." "If you'd chosen daylight," she said, "could you have kept them hidden from the men who were looking for them?" He was quiet. "I don't know," he said. "You decided that the risk from the men looking for them was greater than the risk from the terrain," she said. "You made the best calculation available. The outcome was not what you hoped. But the decision was not wrong. It was the best decision you could make with what you knew." "That's what Daniel said," he said. "He was right," she said. "The outcome is not the same as the decision. You know this. You've known it for 8 years. You just haven't been able to let the knowing be enough." He looked at her. "How do you do that?" he said. "Do what?" "Say the true thing," he said. "Directly, without making it smaller or larger than it is." She thought about it. "Practice," she said. 17 years of managing things that didn't go the way I planned, and having to tell myself the honest version of what happened so I could do better the next time." She paused. "You can't improve on something if you're not honest about what it was." He was looking at her with the expression she had seen before, the fully unguarded one, the one that had no management in it, and it was closer than it had been before, in the literal physical sense as well as the other senses, and she was aware of this, and aware that she had stopped being surprised by it. "You are the most honest person I have ever met," he said. "I am impractically honest," she said. "It gets me in trouble regularly." "Not with me," he said. She looked at him. She thought about Daniel's letter. "Help him too if you can." She thought about 8 years of a man keeping himself moving so he didn't have to feel the weight of standing still. She thought about the fence Daniel had built repaired now and standing clean against the Montana sky because Thomas had seen it needed doing and done it before anyone asked. She thought about the star-filled ride through the Montana night and the sound of him almost laughing and what it had done to something in her chest. She was the most practical woman in Blackwater Ridge. She was done pretending she hadn't noticed what was changing. She leaned forward. She kissed him. It was not long. It was not dramatic. It was simply true. The most practical thing about it was that it was the honest next step from everything that had been building across a month of days, and Eleanor Hayes had always believed in honest next steps. When she drew back, he was very still. She looked at him. "That wasn't," she started. "Don't explain it," he said. She stopped. He said, "Please don't explain it." She was quiet. He looked at her for a moment with the expression she did not have a name for something that held years of alone and the specific quality of someone who had been offered something they had forgotten to want and was deciding whether to believe it was real. He reached up and touched her face. One hand, carefully, the way he did everything. "Eleanor," he said. "I know," she said. "I'm not," he stopped. "I don't know how to." "I know that too," she said. "This isn't," he tried again. "Forgetting Daniel," she said. "I know." He looked at her. "No," he said. "It isn't." He paused. "Is it?" "No," she said. "It's something else." "What is it?" he said. She thought about it honestly. "It's two people who are both better at doing things than saying them," she said, finally admitting that they've stopped being alone. He looked at her for a long moment. Then something in his face changed. Released, she thought the specific releasing of something that had been held too long and that needed to go. "I haven't been anywhere long enough to," he started. "You've been at the Hayes Ranch for a month," she said. "That's not very long," he said. "It's long enough to fix a fence," she said. "And find a letter in a photograph frame, and ride through the night to Helena and back." She held his gaze. "It's long enough to know." He looked at her. "Know what specifically?" he said. "That you're not leaving," she said. "Not when there's still work to do." "Eleanor," he said. "And not when the work is done either," she said. "I don't think you want to." He was very still. "No," he said after a moment that held more in it than moments usually held. "I don't." Outside, the storm continued its indifferent business against the roof and the walls. Inside the line shack with the stove going and the bandaged hand resting on the table between them and the oilcloth saddlebag with the copies she had kept of Daniel's documents sitting in the corner where she had set it when she came in. Inside all of that, two people sat across from each other in the particular quiet of something that had been decided. Not with drama, not with ceremony, simply with the honest acknowledgement of what was already true, which was Eleanor thought exactly how Daniel would have wanted it. The next morning, the storm was gone. They rode back to the Hayes Ranch in the clean, cold light of a Montana morning, and the distance they covered was the same distance they had covered on the way out, but it felt different in a way she could not have mapped precisely and did not try to. Cal met them at the gate. He looked at them. He looked at her bandaged hand. He said, "Any trouble?" "Some," she said. "Nothing we couldn't manage." Cal nodded. He looked at Thomas. Something passed between the two men. Not words, the specific communication that sometimes happened between men who respected each other's judgment and did not need words for the basic facts. Cal went back to the barn. Thomas took the horses. Eleanor went to the house. She stood in the kitchen. Daniel's kitchen. Her kitchen. The kitchen she had run for 17 years, and she set her bag on the table, and she looked at the room and she thought about a letter that said, "I love you. I always will." And she thought about what it meant to carry a thing, and also to put it down. And she thought about the specific difference between forgetting someone and making room for what came after. She had not forgotten Daniel. She would not forget Daniel. But something had shifted in the Montana night in a line shack during a storm, with her hand in the hands of a man who had ridden across a territory on a promise. The room felt different. Not emptier, warmer. She put the coffee on. The door opened. Thomas came in from the barn. He stopped. She looked at him. "Breakfast," she said. He looked at her for a moment. "Yes," he said. He sat down at the table. She made breakfast. And the Hayes Ranch, which had been carrying the specific cold of a house in which someone important was gone, settled around them with the particular quality of a place that was being inhabited again, not the same as before, not a replacement for what had been there, but something real and present and its own thing. The investigation was open in Helena. Victor Blackwell's patience had finally run out, and Thomas Reed, the loneliest cowboy in Montana Territory, was sitting at Eleanor Hayes's kitchen table, eating breakfast he had not had to ask for. It was a beginning, of a kind that neither of them had planned. And those were, in Eleanor's experience, always the most real ones, the beginnings that arrived sideways without announcement in the middle of something else entirely. The morning after they returned from Helena had the quality of a thing reset. Not dramatically. Eleanor was not a woman for dramatic resets. But the kitchen felt different, and she knew why it felt different, and she was practical enough not to pretend otherwise. Thomas ate the breakfast she made. He thanked her for it, in the specific way he thanked her for things directly without flourish, as if being thanked for something was a real exchange rather than a social formality. She told him Cal had noticed the fence on the east side needed attention. He said he would look at it after the morning chores. They did not discuss what had happened in the line shack. They did not need to yet. Something had been said, and it had been heard, and the doing of it was still in progress, and rushing toward its conclusion would have been exactly the wrong response. Eleanor understood this the way she understood most things, not by thinking about it, but by knowing it in the way she knew the land. She let it sit. She went to Daniel's office and wrote a letter to Morrison confirming their safe return, and asking about the timeline for the official proceedings. She wrote a separate letter to Judith Carver, thanking her for her husband's courage and confirming that his testimony had been received. She organized the copies of Daniel's documentation that she had kept for herself and put them in the new hiding place she had identified the day before they left for Helena. Not the photograph frame which was now known, but somewhere Daniel himself had shown her once, years ago, pointing at it with the expression of a man who found the universe's gift for irony amusing. The most secure safe is one that doesn't look like a safe. She filed the documents. She was back in the kitchen making coffee when Cal knocked on the doorframe. He was holding a piece of paper. She did not like the look on his face. "This came this morning," he said. "Ryder brought it from town." He didn't wait for a response. She took the paper. It was not a formal document, not legal language, not official letterhead. It was a single page in a hand she didn't recognize, clean and careful, and carrying the specific impersonal tone of someone who dictated letters rather than wrote them. It said that Victor Blackwell had filed a complaint with the Territorial Marshal's office alleging that Eleanor Hayes and an associate named Thomas Reed had obtained false documentation through forgery and had presented fraudulent materials to a Helena judge in a deliberate attempt to obstruct legitimate land claims in the territory. It said that a territorial marshal was en route to Blackwater Ridge to investigate. It said at the bottom in smaller writing, as if it were a postscript, rather than the point, "The Hayes Ranch is advised to restrict movement of persons and materials pending the investigation." Eleanor read it once. She set it on the table. She read it again. "Cal," she said. "Yes," he said. "Find Thomas," she said. Thomas read the letter in less time than she had. He set it down. He said, "Blackwell knows we went to Helena. He knew before we got back," she said. His men tracked us as far as Hargrove. They reported we went northeast. But someone else was watching in Helena." She paused. "Or his lawyer has a contact at Morrison's courthouse." Thomas said, "The accusation is forgery, which means he's claiming the documents Daniel collected were fabricated," she said. "Which means either he has someone willing to testify to that, or he's betting that the accusation alone creates enough uncertainty to stall Morrison's investigation." "A territorial marshal arriving to investigate the people who filed the evidence," Thomas said, while Blackwell's counter-narrative gets established. "Gives him time," she said. "Yes." She looked at the letter. "This is what he's good at. Not confrontation, delay, creating legal uncertainty until the other side runs out of resources or patience or both." "What do we do?" Thomas said. "Two things," she said. "First, we write to Morrison today. He needs to know about the forgery allegation before the marshal gets here. If Morrison has already begun independent verification of the documents, the allegation falls apart faster. And second, we find out who he's planning to use as a witness," she said. "Because the forgery allegation needs someone to testify that they saw the fabrication happen. There's nobody who could testify to that honestly, which means he has someone prepared to testify dishonestly." She paused. "We need to know who before the marshal arrives." Thomas looked at her. "You're not frightened," he said. "I'm furious," she said. "It presents similarly." He looked at the letter. "How long before the marshal gets here?" he said. "A day, maybe two, if he's coming from Billings," she said. "One if he's already been dispatched from Helena." She stood. "I need May." May Calloway arrived within the hour. She had heard about the rider Silver Creek was not large, and riders who arrived at ranches without waiting for a response were noticed, and she had the expression of a woman who had already been gathering information before being asked. She sat at the kitchen table with Eleanor and Thomas, and said without being prompted, "Blackwell had a meeting at his house last night. 4 men came. One of them I recognized as his lawyer. The other 3 I didn't know until this morning." "Who were they?" Eleanor said. "One of them is a land assessor from Billings," May said. "Name of Harding. He's done work for Blackwell before, assessed several properties that Blackwell subsequently acquired." She paused. "The other 2 are brothers named Fitch. They've done various things. Nothing I can point to specifically. But they've been in Blackwater Ridge twice in the past year, always when Blackwell was involved in something complicated." "The Fitch brothers," Thomas said. May looked at him. "You know them." "By reputation," he said. "They've appeared in 3 territories I know of as witnesses in disputed land cases, always for the same side." He paused. "They're paid witnesses." Eleanor looked at him. "Blackwell is importing testimony," she said. "He's done it before," Thomas said. "In the Morrison property case 2 years ago, the water rights dispute you resolved. There were 2 witnesses prepared to testify about the water rights in Blackwell's favor. The case collapsed before it got to that point, so they were never used." He paused. "The same men?" "I don't know," he said. "But the pattern is the same." Eleanor sat with this. "The marshal," she said. "He's coming to investigate a forgery allegation. Blackwell needs the Fitch brothers to tell the marshal they saw something. But what could they plausibly claim to have seen?" Thomas said, "Daniel's documents. They need someone to say the documents were created recently, not during Daniel's investigation." "Daniel's handwriting," Eleanor said. "If someone could credibly claim they saw those documents being written..." She stopped. "Except they can't. Those documents have been in that photograph frame for months. Anyone who looked at the paper, the ink..." "Can a marshal verify that?" Thomas said. "Morrison can," she said. "He has people who can examine documents. Ink age, paper condition, the specific wear on folds that indicate how long something has been in storage." She looked at Thomas. "That's why we need Morrison to begin that verification before the marshal arrives. If Morrison's experts have already confirmed the document's age, the Fitch brothers have nothing to contradict." "Write the letter now," Thomas said. "I already started it," she said. She finished the letter to Morrison within 30 minutes. She sent Cal with it, not the regular mail which went through the town post office where it could be delayed with instructions to ride to Helena directly and place it in Morrison's hands before nightfall. Cal took it without question and was gone within the hour. May stayed. She said after Cal left, "There's something else." Eleanor looked at her. "Wade Carver," May said. "His wife came to the store this morning. She was frightened. Judith said a man came to their house last night, not one of the three from Blackwell's meeting, someone she hadn't seen before, and told Wade that if he testified, there would be consequences for their family." Eleanor was very still. Thomas said, "A threat." "Yes," May said. "What kind of consequences?" Thomas said. "The man didn't specify," May said, "which is usually worse than specifics." Eleanor thought about Judith Carver's face when she had come to the ranch. The steadiness of a woman who had made a decision that cost her something and was not going back on it. She thought about Wade Carver, who had not slept a full night since Daniel died. "Where are they now?" she said. "Still at their property," May said. Judith didn't know whether to stay or go. "They should come here," Thomas said. Eleanor looked at him. "If they're at their property and someone wanted to prevent Wade from testifying, they're isolated," he said. "If they're here, then anything that happens to them happens in front of witnesses," Eleanor said. "And in front of me," Thomas said. She looked at him. "Go," she said. He went. May looked at Eleanor across the table. "He's different from what I expected," May said. "Everyone says that," Eleanor said. "What did you expect?" May said. Eleanor thought about it. "I expected someone who wanted something," she said, "like everyone else who's come to this ranch in the past month offering to help." "And he doesn't," May said. Eleanor looked at the door Thomas had just walked through. "He wants to keep a promise," she said. "That's different from wanting something." May was quiet. "Eleanor," she said. "I know," Eleanor said. "Daniel would—" "I know," Eleanor said again. May said nothing else, but she put her hand over Eleanor's on the table. They sat like that for a moment, two women in a kitchen that had seen a great deal of difficult things and was still standing. Then Eleanor got up to make more coffee. Thomas came back with the Carvers by mid-afternoon. Judith came in first, holding herself with the careful composure of a woman managing fear by controlling everything she could control. Wade came behind her, a stocky man in his 50s, who looked like what he was, which was a man who had been carrying something too heavy for too long, and had recently decided to put it down, even though he was not sure the ground where he was putting it would hold. He looked at Eleanor when he came in. "Mrs. Hayes," he said. "Mr. Carver," she said. "Sit down. You're safe here." He sat. Something in him released slightly when she said it, the specific release of a man who had been waiting for an unqualified statement and had gotten one. He told them about the man who had come to his house. The description was vague in the way that intimidation was sometimes vague. A man who had not introduced himself, who had stood in the doorway and said what he said without specifics, who had left without being invited to leave. Wade had not recognized him. Judith had noted the horse he rode, a distinctive gray with unusual markings. Thomas said the horse. "Brown mane on a gray coat," Judith said. "Very pale, almost white. One back foot with a black stocking." Thomas said nothing for a moment. Then he said, "I've seen that horse." Eleanor looked at him. "On the North Ridge," he said. "The rider who was watching the ranch 3 weeks ago." He paused. "That's not a man Blackwell hired recently. That's someone who's been watching this property for weeks." "Before we went to Helena," Eleanor said. "Before we found the documents," Thomas said. Everyone at the table understood what this meant. "He's had someone watching since before we went to the photograph frame," Eleanor said. "Which means he doesn't know what we found," Thomas said. "If he knew, he would have moved before we got to Morrison. He knew we were going somewhere important, but not what we had." "But the forgery allegation," Eleanor said. "If he doesn't know what's in the documents, he doesn't need to know specifics to allege forgery," Thomas said. "He just needs to create doubt. The Fitch brothers don't need to describe documents they've actually seen. They just need to say they saw something. Which a good lawyer can make sound like everything, Wade said quietly. Everyone looked at him. He had the expression of a man who had spent 3 years watching a lawyer turn nothing into something. I've seen Blackwell do this before, Wade said. The Morrison property, the Hendricks land, the Carlo family, you probably don't know about them, they left the territory. Each time there was a point where it looked like the evidence was going to hold, and then something happened to the evidence. Not destroyed, just questioned, made uncertain. He paused. He doesn't need to win in court. He just needs to create enough uncertainty that honest people start to doubt, Eleanor said. And then they get tired. Yes, Wade said. And then they sell. The kitchen was quiet. Then Eleanor said, "Not this time." Wade looked at her. "He's done this because the people on the other side have been alone," she said. Individual families isolated. He comes at them from multiple directions: legal pressure, financial pressure, social pressure, and they don't have enough people who know the full picture. She looked around the table. We have the full picture. Morrison has the documents. The Fitch brothers are going to testify in front of a judge who already has independent verification of what those documents are. She paused. And Wade, you are going to testify about what you saw directly, not through a lawyer's summary, directly. Wade said, "He'll come after my family again." "He'll try," Thomas said. "Can you stop him?" Wade said. Thomas looked at Eleanor. She looked at Thomas. "Yes," she said. Something in the way she said it, the flat, unqualified certainty of it, made Wade Carver sit back in his chair with the expression of a man who was choosing in this moment to believe something he had not believed for 3 years, that he had made the right decision. The marshal arrived the following afternoon. His name was Connell, a man in his 40s who had the specific quality of someone who had been a marshal for long enough to have developed a nose for the shape of a situation before the details were presented. He arrived with a deputy and a horse and a formal commission from the territorial marshal's office, and he sat in Eleanor's kitchen with a cup of coffee she poured, and he looked at her across the table with professional assessment. "Mrs. Hayes," he said, "I'm here because a complaint was filed alleging document forgery." "I know," she said. "I received the notification." "I have to investigate," he said. "That's my job." "I know that too," she said. "The documents in question were presented to Judge Morrison in Helena last week," he said. "I've been in contact with Morrison's office." "Then you know he's already begun independent verification," she said. Connell looked at her steadily. "He mentioned that," he said. "He also mentioned that the forgery allegation arrived at his office within 12 hours of you leaving Helena." "Which tells you something about the timing," she said. "It tells me something about the timing," he agreed. He set his coffee down. "Mrs. Hayes, I've spoken to Judge Harlan in this town. I've spoken to 3 members of the town council. I've heard a version of recent events from a lawyer representing Victor Blackwell." He paused. "I'd like to hear your version." "You'll hear more than my version," she said. "Wade Carver is in the next room." Connell went still. "Wade Carver," he said. "He's prepared to testify formally," she said, "about his direct involvement in Blackwell's land operation, about specific transactions, about the men who facilitated those transactions." She paused. "He's been threatened since he arrived here. Last night, by a man riding a distinctive gray horse that has been spotted watching this property for the past 3 weeks. Connell said, "Can he describe the man?" Thomas appeared in the doorway. He had been listening from the hall. "I can do better than that," Thomas said. He came in and sat across from the marshal. "I've been tracking the same rider. I know his pattern. I know his schedule based on where he's positioned on the North Ridge. He'll be there tomorrow morning between 7 and 9. He paused. "If you want to meet him." Connell looked at Thomas for a long moment. "You're Reed," he said. "Yes," Thomas said. Connell said, "You've been named in the forgery complaint." "I know," Thomas said. "Do you have anything to say about that?" Thomas said, "I'd like you to look at the documents yourself. Not the copies in Helena, the originals are here. The originals that have been in a concealed location inside this house since Daniel Hayes put them there before he died. He paused. A document examiner can tell you how long those papers have been stored. The ink, the fold patterns, the paper condition. He looked at the marshal steadily. If those documents were forged recently, the examiner will tell you so. If they weren't, then the complaint falls apart, Connell said. Yes, Thomas said. Connell looked at his coffee. He looked at Eleanor. The Fitch brothers, he said carefully. You know they're in town. I know, Eleanor said. They've filed statements with Blackwell's lawyer, Connell said, claiming they witnessed document preparation that they describe as consistent with recent fabrication. Then bring your document examiner, Eleanor said. Let the evidence speak before the statements do. Connell was quiet. Then he said, I'll need to see the originals. I'll get them, Eleanor said. She went to the new hiding place. She thought, as she always thought when she went to it, about Daniel saying the most secure safe is one that doesn't look like a safe. And about how he had shown her this particular spot once years ago when they were repairing that section of the floor, and had said with the specific pleasure of a man who liked the universe's sense of humor, you know, if a person wanted to hide something in this house, this is where I'd put it. She lifted the loose board beneath the kitchen floor. She took out the oilcloth packet. She brought it to Connell. He unwrapped it carefully. He looked at the documents. Not as a document examiner, as a man who had been reading documents for 20 years and had developed his own instincts about what age looked like on paper. He turned the pages. He examined the fold lines. He looked at the ink. He looked up at Eleanor. I'm going to need my examiner, he said. I understand, she said. He can be here in 3 days, he said, from Billings. Then we'll wait 3 days, she said. Connell looked at Thomas, then back at Eleanor. In the meantime, he said, I'd like to speak with Carver, and I'd like to know more about this rider on the ridge. He'll be there tomorrow morning between 7 and 9, Thomas said again. Then I'll be there at 6, Connell said. The examiner arrived in 2 days, not 3. He was a small man with precise hands and wire-rimmed spectacles, and the focused quietness of someone who worked with details and had learned that details were more reliable than people. He sat with the documents for 4 hours. He asked for water twice and a candle once and nothing else. When he was finished, he came to Eleanor and said without ceremony, These documents are not forgeries. The ink oxidation pattern is consistent with writing done no less than 6 months ago, and more likely 8 to 12 months. The paper has the wear patterns of something stored folded in a fixed position for the same period. The handwriting shows the specific characteristics of someone writing quickly and regularly. It's not copied or traced. He paused. Whoever wrote these wrote them in the course of ordinary work, over an extended period, not in a single recent sitting. Eleanor said, Daniel Hayes wrote them. I can't attest to authorship, he said, but I can attest that they are not recent fabrications. She said, Thank you. He packed up his materials and left. Connell was in the room. He had heard everything. He said, The Fitch brothers are going to have a problem. Yes, she said. He said, Victor Blackwell is going to have a considerably larger problem. Yes, she said. Do you want to be present, he said carefully, when I speak with Blackwell? She looked at him. No, she said. He looked surprised. This was Daniel's investigation, she said. He built it. Wade Carver is prepared to testify about what he knows. The documents speak for themselves. She paused. I don't need to be in the room when Blackwell hears what's coming. I don't need him to see my face. Connell looked at her for a moment. Mrs. Hayes, he said, I've been doing this job for 19 years. I've met a lot of people on the right side of a case who needed the other person to know they'd won. I know I've won, she said. That's enough. He nodded slowly. Yes, he said. I suppose it is. He left to find Blackwell. Thomas came to stand beside her at the window. You could have gone, he said. I know, she said. He would have sat across from you and seen what 8 months of Daniel's work and a month of yours produced, he said. He would have understood exactly who put him where he's going. He already knows, she said. He's known for a while. She looked out the window at the Hayes Ranch at the fence line that ran true, and the barn that held horses she knew by name, and the land that had been hers and Daniel's, and was now hers, and— She stopped that thought. She let it sit where it was. Not yet. "Eleanor," Thomas said. She looked at him. "Did you mean it?" he said. "In the shack." She said, "Did you—" He looked at her. "Yes," he said. "Then yes," she said. He looked at the land outside the window. "I don't know how to stay somewhere," he said. "I haven't stayed anywhere in 8 years." "You've been here a month," she said. "That's a start." "What if I'm not?" He stopped. "What if I'm still not?" "Thomas," she said. "You fixed Daniel's fence before anyone asked you to. You rode through the night to Helena and kept us safe on the road. You brought the Carvers here because they needed protection, and you understood that before I said it." She paused. "You know how to stay. You've just been telling yourself you don't." He was quiet. She said, "Daniel said you were the best man he'd ever worked with." "He also said I was the most alone he'd ever seen," Thomas said. "Yes," she said. "Both things. He didn't think they were permanent." Thomas looked at the window. "The most practical woman in Blackwater Ridge," he said. "Don't start," she said. "I mean it," he said. You say the thing that's true, and it lands, and I don't have room to argue with it because it's true." "That's generally the advantage of truth," she said. He turned to look at her. He said, "I promised Daniel I'd finish what he started." "You did," she said. "It's finished. I don't want to leave because the reason for being here is resolved," he said. "Then don't leave because it's resolved," she said. "Leave if you want to leave. Stay if you want to stay." She looked at him directly. "Do you want to stay?" He held her gaze. "Yes," he said. "Then stay," she said. Outside Blackwater Ridge was continuing its business, the sounds of a town that was about to learn something significant about a man it had long assumed was untouchable, and that would need some time to understand what that meant. Inside the Hayes kitchen with coffee on the stove, and the Carvers in the next room, and the fence Daniel built standing clean along the north pasture, two people looked at each other and told each other the truth, which was Eleanor Hayes had always believed the only place anything real could begin, and what began in that kitchen in the days that followed was as real as anything she had ever built. Victor Blackwell was arrested 3 days after Connell's examiner confirmed the documents. It did not happen the way Eleanor had imagined it, not that she had spent much time imagining it, because imagining outcomes before they arrived was a habit she had never been able to afford. It happened on a Tuesday morning quietly, in the way that significant things sometimes happened when the preparation had been thorough. Connell and his deputy went to the Blackwell property with a territorial warrant, and Blackwell came out to the porch and looked at the warrant and looked at Connell and said nothing. He went inside and came out with his lawyer, and the lawyer said 4 sentences that did not change anything, and then Blackwell was in Connell's custody and on his way to Helena to answer to Judge Morrison. Cal brought the news to Eleanor at the ranch. She was in the kitchen going over the winter supply accounts when he came in. She read his face before he spoke. "It's done," she said. "Connell took him this morning," Cal said. "Peaceable, no argument." Eleanor set down her pen. She sat for a moment, not with drama. She was not a woman for dramatic moments, but with the specific stillness of someone letting a thing that had been pressing against her chest for a month finally stop pressing. Not gone, but different. The specific difference between carrying a weight and putting it down. "Daniel," she said quietly. Not to anyone in the room. Cal understood. He nodded once and left. She sat alone in the kitchen for exactly as long as she needed to. Then she picked up her pen and went back to the accounts. Thomas found her there an hour later. He came in from the barn and stopped in the doorway when he saw her, saw the set of her shoulders, the pen in her hand, the accounts open in front of her, all of it presenting as ordinary. He looked at her face. "Cal told me," he said. "Yes," she said. He came in. He sat across from her. He did not say anything else immediately, which was one of the things about him she had noticed early, and never stopped noticing the quality of knowing when the thing that was needed was presence rather than words. "Do you want to talk about it?" he said after a moment. "I think he knew how it was going to end," she said. "Daniel. I think that's why he wrote the letter. It wasn't despair. He was practical. He was making sure the work would finish whether or not he was there to finish it." "Yes," Thomas said. "He planned for both outcomes," she said. "That's the thing I keep thinking about. He did not assume he would survive it. He made sure it would succeed regardless." She looked at the accounts. "That's what good work looks like. You build it to outlast you." Thomas was quiet. "The ranch," he said. "That's what you've been doing." "The ranch, the accounts, the relationships with the buyers, and the hands," she said. "Yes." She looked up at him. "That's what he was doing with the investigation. He built it so I could finish it if I had to, so you could." "We both did," Thomas said. She looked at him. "Yes," she said. "We did." The question of what came next was not a single question. It was several questions folded together, and Eleanor, being Eleanor, began unpacking them one at a time, rather than all at once. The most immediate question was the Carvers. Wade Carver's formal testimony was scheduled for the following week in Helena. He would need to travel there, which meant he would be away from his property for several days, which meant the property needed to be looked after, and Judith needed to not be alone. Eleanor arranged this without being asked. She sent Jimmy to stay at the Carver property while Wade was in Helena, and she invited Judith to stay at the ranch, which Judith accepted with the gratitude of a woman who had been frightened for long enough to be genuinely relieved by a concrete offer of safety. Judith came on Thursday. She brought a pie which Eleanor told her was unnecessary and which Thomas told her was the best thing he had eaten since arriving in Montana, which made Judith laugh a real laugh, surprised out of her the kind that came when tension released faster than you expected. Eleanor, watching from across the kitchen, thought, "There he is, the man who made people feel like the room was a safe place to be. Not by performing warmth, by simply being present in a way that made warmth possible." She had been watching him do it for a month with Cal and the hands and Henry Carver's boy in town, and now Judith Carver, the specific gift of a man who had spent years learning to be invisible and had discovered in the process how to make other people feel seen. She had not told him she had noticed this. She was going to, but not yet. The second question was the families. Morrison's investigation, as it moved forward, was uncovering the full scope of what Blackwell had done, and the scope was larger than even Daniel's notes had suggested. 14 documented land transactions, but the actual number of families affected was closer to 23. Some had sold and left the territory. Some were still on their properties, but under arrangements that had been structured to disadvantage them. Some had lost and come back in different forms. Seasonal workers on land that had been theirs, people whose names were no longer on deeds they had built their lives on. Morrison sent Eleanor a letter asking if she would be willing to speak to his office about what she knew regarding the individual cases, because Daniel's notes contained details that had not been part of the formal documentation and that could help in the recovery process. Eleanor wrote back within the day. She said yes. She also said that she was sending Thomas Reed, who had knowledge of several of the cases from his previous work with Daniel, and who could speak to specific facts she did not have direct knowledge of. She asked that both testimonies be received and considered together. Thomas read this over her shoulder. "You didn't ask me," he said. "Would you have said no?" she said. He thought about it. "No," he said. "Then I was saving time," she said. He was quiet for a moment. "You're the most efficient person I've ever met," he said. "I manage accounts for a living," she said. "Efficiency is a professional requirement." He said, "Eleanor." "Yes," she said. "Thank you," he said, "for including me." She looked up at him. "You're part of this," she said. "You've been part of this since before you arrived." Stop thanking me for acknowledging what's true." He looked at her with the expression she had been cataloging for a month, and still did not have a precise name for the one that lived at the specific intersection of gratitude and something warmer, and something that was still even now slightly surprised. "I'm working on it," he said. "Work faster," she said. "I have accounts to finish." He laughed. The real one. The full one. Not the almost laugh she had been coaxing out of him since the first week. The kind that came from somewhere unguarded and did not try to become smaller than it was. She went back to the accounts, but she was smiling. The third question, the one she had been letting sit, arrived on its own schedule, the way the most important things did not, when she was ready for it, but when it was ready. It came on a Sunday evening. Thomas was at the fence along the north pasture, the fence Daniel had built repaired now and standing true, and Eleanor had come out to tell him that dinner was ready, and she found him standing at the same place she had found him the first time, looking at the timber with the same expression. She stopped beside him. The evening was the specific cold clean of Montana in late October, the sky the color it turned before the first real frost. Everything sharp and clear and honest. "What are you thinking about?" she said. He said, "I'm thinking about what he looked like when he talked about you." She was still. "Daniel," he said, "when he talked about you, he had an expression that I didn't know how to describe when I saw it, and I think I understand it better now." "What expression?" she said. "Like he could see the whole of something at once," Thomas said. "The way you look when you understand a full accounting, not just one number, but the whole picture. How it connects." He paused. "He looked at the idea of you the way you look at something you understand completely." Eleanor said nothing for a moment. "He loved you very specifically," Thomas said. Not just in the general way that people say they love someone. He knew the specific shape of who you were, and he loved that specific thing." "Yes," she said. "I want you to know I understand that," he said. "I'm not asking to replace it." "I know," she said. "And I want you to know that He stopped, tried again. "What I feel is its own thing. Not a replacement, not something that diminishes what was there." She looked at him. "Thomas," she said. He looked at her. "I know all of this," she said. "I worked it out 3 weeks ago. I've been waiting for you to work it out too." He stared at her. "3 weeks ago," he said. "Approximately," she said. "Since the night you fixed the fence and didn't ask for acknowledgement, and then came in for dinner and listened to Wade Carver talk for 40 minutes without interrupting." She paused. "I made a note of it." "You made a note," he said. "I make notes about most things," she said. He looked at the fence, then back at her. "What did the note say?" he said. She thought about it. "It said, 'This man is going to be a problem,'" she said. "In the way that the most useful things are always problems, because they require you to reorganize your understanding of what you were planning." He was quiet. "What were you planning?" he said. "To manage the ranch alone for the indefinite future," she said. "To finish Daniel's investigation. To keep the land he built. To be sufficient." She paused. "I was planning to be sufficient. I was good at it." "You are good at it," he said. "Yes," she said. "But sufficient is different from this." She looked at him directly. "This is better than sufficient." He held her gaze. "I promised Daniel I'd finish what he started," he said. "You told me that before," she said. "I'm telling you again because I want you to understand what it means now," he said. "It didn't feel like a burden when I made it. It felt like the only thing I could do for someone who had done something for me I didn't deserve." He paused. "What I didn't expect was that finishing it would feel like finding something." "What did you find?" she said. He looked at the fence, at the north pasture, at the land that stretched out in the Montana evening, honest and cold and enormous. "Somewhere I want to stay," he said. She breathed. "Then stay," she said. "I intend to," he said. She looked at him. He looked at her. And in the specific, honest light of a Montana evening with Daniel's fence standing between them and the pasture, and the cold coming in from the north, and everything that had happened in the past month settling around them like something earned, Eleanor Hayes reached out and put her hand in Thomas Reed's. He held it, not dramatically, not performing anything. Simply held it. The way you held something you had decided to keep. The hearing in Helena was in November. Eleanor and Thomas went together, and this time they rode directly. No misdirection. No ridge watchers to account for no oilcloth packet of documents to protect. The documents were in Morrison's hands. Blackwell was in custody. The investigation was proceeding with the momentum of something that had been carefully built, and that could not now be stopped by anything Blackwell or his lawyer or the Fitch brothers could produce. The Fitch brothers, as it turned out, had assessed the situation with the practical intelligence of men in their profession, and had declined to testify on Blackwell's behalf when informed that the document examiner had already produced a report. Men who sold testimony knew better than to sell it against evidence. Blackwell's lawyer tried 3 angles. Morrison disposed of each one. Wade Carver testified for 2 hours on the second day. He was not a dramatic witness. He was a quiet man who answered questions directly and did not embellish and did not minimize, and the specific absence of performance in his testimony was, Eleanor thought, more effective than any prepared speech would have been. The families whose transactions he described became real as he described them. Not statistics in a land record. Real people with real stakes. Morrison listened to all of it. At the end of the second day, he called Eleanor and Thomas to his office. He said, "I want to tell you both something before we proceed to the final determination." They sat across from him. "What Sheriff Hayes built," he said, "is going to result in meaningful restoration for a significant number of families. Not all of them. Some of the transactions are too old. Some of the people have moved too far. Some of the legal entanglement is too complex. But most of them." He paused. "That matters." "Yes," Eleanor said. "He was a good sheriff," Morrison said. "He was a better man than the town he served always recognized." He looked at Eleanor directly. "What you brought me when you came to this office, you could have destroyed it. You could have used it as leverage for your own purposes. You could have made it about your ranch, your situation, your loss." He paused. "You didn't." "It was his work," Eleanor said. "Not mine to use for anything except what he built it for." "Yes," Morrison said. "That's what I mean." He looked at Thomas. "Daniel Hayes," he said, "sent me a letter about you 8 months ago, not about the investigation, just about you." Thomas was still. "He said you were the kind of man who did what was right, even when it cost him," Morrison said. "He said you'd made a wrong call once, and had been paying for it ever since, and that the payment was unjust, because the call had been made from the right principles." He paused. "He asked me to remember that if Reed ever came to my office." Thomas said nothing. His jaw was tight in the way it got when something had moved through him that he was keeping inside. "He was right," Morrison said. "I've watched you in this process. You did not cut corners. You did not use what you knew for personal advantage. You protected people who needed protecting, and you brought what you had to the right place." He paused. "The wrong call you made 8 years ago, whatever it was, does not define the rest of it." Thomas looked at the window. He said something similar to me." "And did you believe him?" Morrison said. A pause. "I'm working on it," Thomas said. Morrison almost smiled. "Work faster," he said. Eleanor looked at Thomas. He looked at her. The expression on his face was she had been cataloging his expressions for 2 months, and she had never seen this one before. It was the expression of a man who had been carrying something for a very long time and had just been told by multiple people across multiple years that he could put it down. The expression of someone who was finally beginning to believe it. She did not say anything. She did not need to. The final determination was issued the following morning. Victor Blackwell was found to have engaged in systematic fraudulent manipulation of land transactions in violation of territorial property law. He was remanded to territorial custody pending a formal trial. His holdings were frozen pending review. A recovery process for affected families was to be established under Morrison's oversight. The Fitch brothers were issued formal notices and advised to consider their ongoing residency in Montana Territory carefully. Wade Carver was granted formal immunity in exchange for his testimony and cooperation. Eleanor read the determination document that Morrison's clerk provided. She folded it. She put it in her coat pocket. Thomas was waiting outside when she came out. He looked at her face. "Done," she said. He breathed. One long breath that carried a month of held things out with it. "Done," he said. They rode home. The November that followed was the quietest Montana November Eleanor had experienced since the first winter at the ranch, when she and Daniel were still learning what they had built and were still discovering what they were capable of together. This quiet was different. Not the quiet of two people still figuring each other out. The quiet of two people who had figured out a great deal in a short time and were now in the particular piece of building something that did not need to announce itself. Thomas stayed. This was not dramatic. He did not make a speech about it. He simply did not leave, and his presence in the house shifted over the weeks from guest to not quite husband in the conventional sense, but something more real than a legal arrangement. The hands noticed it and adjusted to it in the way that people adjusted to things that were obviously correct. Cal watched it for 2 weeks and then on a Thursday evening said to Eleanor with the brevity of a man who did not waste words, "Good." "Yes," Eleanor said. "He's the kind of man Daniel would have picked," Cal said. "Daniel did pick him," Eleanor said. Cal nodded. He went back to the barn. Henry Carver. The Carvers' 12-year-old son, who had come to the ranch with his family during the difficult period, and who had taken a specific interest in Thomas, in the way that boys sometimes took interests in men who were quiet and competent and did not talk down to them, came to Thomas one afternoon and asked if he could teach him to rope properly. Thomas looked at the boy. "What do you know?" he said. "Some," Henry said. "Not enough." "Show me what you've got," Thomas said. "Then we'll see what needs fixing." They spent 2 hours in the barn. Eleanor watched from the doorway for a while. She thought about Daniel showing her the accounts the year she started keeping them sitting beside her, not in front of her asking what she thought each figure meant, rather than telling her. The specific patience of someone who understood that teaching was about the learner, not the teacher. Thomas had that quality. She had not expected it, and she had noticed it immediately. She went back inside and made coffee. The letter from Ruth. Her stepsister, who had written occasionally over the years, arrived in late November and mentioned, among other things, that the story of what had happened in Blackwater Ridge had traveled east as stories traveled in territories imprecisely, with the important parts retained and the details scrambled. Ruth said she had heard that Eleanor had taken on a ranch hand who turned out to be an undercover lawman who had exposed a massive fraud ring and saved the whole county. Eleanor wrote back, "He is not a lawman. He is my husband. The rest is approximately correct." She showed the letter to Thomas before she sent it. He read it. He said, "Is that how you'd describe me?" "Your husband." She said, "Is there a description you'd prefer?" He thought about it. "No," he said. She sent the letter. The formal proceeding against Blackwell completed in January. He was convicted on 7 counts and sentenced accordingly. His land holdings were redistributed through a process that took most of the following year, slow, imperfect, sometimes frustrating, but real. 11 families received back property or compensation. 3 families who had left the territory returned. The Hargrove family, who had been on their land for 20 years before Blackwell's pressure had made them sell, came back in the spring and plowed their field for the first time in 4 years. Eleanor knew this because May wrote to her about it. May had become, without anyone deciding that this was her function, the keeper of the county's recovery record. She told Eleanor these things in letters that were practical and warm, and that arrived with the consistency of someone who had decided this correspondence mattered, and was going to maintain it accordingly. Eleanor wrote back every time. The spring brought its own version of the question Eleanor had been carrying. It arrived on a morning in April when Thomas came into the kitchen with the specific expression he wore when he had been thinking about something for a while and had decided to say it. She poured him coffee without being asked. He sat. "I want to talk about the arrangement," he said. She sat across from him. "Which part?" she said. "The arrangement that was made because of a law," he said. "The arrangement that was supposed to be temporary." He looked at the table. "I don't want a temporary arrangement." She looked at him. "I know," she said. "I want to know if you—" He stopped. "Thomas," she said. He looked up. "I told you to stay," she said. "I meant it. I don't say things I don't mean." "I know you don't," he said. "Then why are you asking?" she said. He was quiet. "Because wanting something is different from being certain you deserve it," he said. She looked at him for a long moment. She thought about Morrison saying the wrong call you made 8 years ago does not define the rest of it. She thought about Daniel saying he's the best man I've ever worked with and the most alone I've ever seen. Help him too. She thought about what help looked like, not comfort, not reassurance, but the specific, honest naming of what was true. "You repaired a fence that nobody asked you to repair," she said. "You drove through the night to Helena to protect people you had just met. You held a Carver family together when they were frightened. You kept a promise to a dead man because you believed it mattered." She held his gaze. "You deserve to be somewhere. You deserve to have something of your own." She paused. "You have it. I'm telling you that you have it." He looked at her. The expression she had been cataloging for 6 months, the one she had never had a name for, became something she could name. It was relief. The specific, deep relief of a man who had been waiting for permission he could not give himself, and had finally received it from someone he trusted. He said, "Eleanor." "Yes," she said. "I'm staying," he said. "I know," she said. "Permanently," he said. "I know that too," she said. He reached across the table. She put her hand in his. It was the same gesture as the North Pasture in October, the same hands, the same quality of holding something decided, but different in the way that things were different. When months had passed, and what had been uncertain had become certain, and what had been offered had been received and kept. Outside the Hayes Ranch was in the particular busy piece of April, the hands starting the spring work, the cattle moved to the new pasture rotation, the fence lines being checked after winter, the land doing what it always did when the season changed, which was become itself again. The judge had asked Eleanor at the final hearing whether she wished she had handled things differently. She had said no. She had meant it for the reasons she had said. She had not married a man who saved her. She had partnered with a man who believed she could save herself. But she had also meant it for another reason she had not stated publicly, which was a reason she kept for herself, and for Thomas, and for the memory of Daniel Hayes that she carried like a good ledger, complete, accurate, irreplaceable. She had not handled things differently because the way she had handled them had produced this. Thomas Reed at her kitchen table. The Carver family safe on their property. 11 families with their land. The Hayes Ranch running true. And a fence along the North Pasture built by a man she had loved and repaired by a man she loved, standing solid in the Montana spring. Some accounts Eleanor Hayes believed were worth every entry. And the best ones were the ones you built yourself from the first honest figure to the last. Because what you built honestly, you understood completely. And what you understood completely, you could trust. She trusted this. She trusted him. And the cowboy who had arrived in Blackwater Ridge as a ghost, alone, carrying a promise and a burden he had been hauling for 8 years, became on a Tuesday morning in April, with the spring coming in through the kitchen window, simply a man at home. Which was, it turned out, exactly what Daniel Hayes had always intended, and exactly what both of them had needed all along.